So hello everybody, and thank you very much for tuning in. This, as I was just mentioning there off air, is potentially like a new format live podcast that I'm trialing out. So if this goes really well and the sound works for nothing for a start, but if this goes really well and we get some nice feedback, then this might be something that we carry forward. Obviously, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the podcast. I'm going to introduce myself, but very briefly, just before we begin, this podcast is essentially made possible by the BTN Academy. So I'm not going to do any like heavy selling or anything. But yeah, if you enjoy this conversation, Heather is one of our lecturers on the BTN Academy. I am one of the lecturers on the BTN Academy. So if you're enjoying this kind of stuff, please do check us out. So with all of that ramble out of the way, Heather, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah,
awesome.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So, Heather, most people will know who I am, but briefly, for those of you who don't, I'm Tom Bainbridge. I'm the Academy Manager for the BTN Academy, which means that I take care of our students and primarily I teach them about nutrition application and all of these things. But Heather is what I would refer to as a proper nutrition person. So Heather, would you like to give us a little bit of background about yourself? Just briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a dietitian by background, qualified quite a few years ago now, probably too many that I like to think of, and worked for a number of years in the NHS, so in the hospital setting, on a whole range of different wards and different clinical specialities. So worked in oncology, intensive care, outpatient clinics. So really got my sort of grounding and my introduction to dietetics there. And then I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to move into setting up a children's weight management program that was being funded by our public health department, and moved into that area. So much more of a focus then on sort of public health and working with families, working with children. Did that for a number of years, then moved to work away from the NHS and into a private organisation who are called Thrive Tribe. And we're funded by public health organisations, but we run healthy lifestyle initiatives that include, as well as weight management for adults and children, we also do stop smoking advice, cook and eat sessions, health checks. So very much working with the community to try and improve health. And that is where I find myself now. So mainly working with adult and child weight management, but we also have a schools program we run that we've developed as well. So I've been working on that, looking at developing a lot of the resources, material, training that we then deliver in schools.
Awesome. Oh, that's really cool. So it sounds like you've been quite busy.
Yes.
So this evening I really want to delve into the child nutrition side of things, because it was that sort of really sparked my interest. But just briefly on what you said there, I'm almost completely naive to how the clinical side of nutrition works. So working with, in the case of like oncology or ICU, intensive care and things like this.
Yeah.
I know this is a really broad question, but what would a day look like in that kind of setting? Like you go into work, and what would be your tasks for the day?
Yeah, so we would have a referral system. So the nurses, doctors on the hospital wards would refer through those patients that they felt needed nutritional support for whatever reason. And the majority of clients we would see when we were in hospital are those who, because they are poorly, are not able to meet their nutritional requirements. So I would say sort of 80 to 90% of patients that we would see would be those who were requiring additional nutrition to try and meet their requirements. And all hospitals now actually should be using a nutrition screening tool, so that all patients, when they are admitted to hospital, have a screening assessment done to try and pick up on malnutrition, because we know that's a huge problem within our hospital settings, and it can increase length of stay within beds, and actually it costs the NHS a huge amount of money. So we were all responsible and allocated different wards, different departments. We would get our referrals through for the day, get our patient load through for the day, and then head off onto the hospital wards really to try and assess patients, speak to the nursing staff. We would attend ward rounds and then manage our client caseload we would see people initially and then go back and see them a couple of days later, try and see how they're progressing on. Most clinical dietetics or dietitians would have some sort of outpatient clinic as well that they would be doing on maybe a couple of times a week.
Yeah.
Intensive care obviously is quite different. There you would be going in, assessing the needs of that patient, and on the whole, the patients in intensive care are reliant on tube feeds or being fed intravenously. So you'd be looking at calculating their requirements, working out their needs, and then deciding which feed regime would best suit them.
Yeah, so I guess that end of it's a lot more sort of prescriptive, sort of this is what this person needs, we will give it to them.
Yeah.
When you're working on the wards and you're going around and you've got your caseload,
mm-hmm.
how much of that is then, because again, I'm not sure, I'm guessing that is still heavily dependent on the client's adherence or the patient's adherence, or is this, because you're the dietitian, you essentially decide what food is available to them?
No, I mean, working in a hospital setting, I would say is hugely challenging for many reasons. Obviously, you're very restricted by the food that's available, provided from the hospital kitchen, and obviously that is all provided on a very strict budget. You're then very reliant on the staff on the ward who, if any of us have been on a hospital ward, know how hugely busy they are. So a lot of the supplements or high calorie supplement drinks we'd be prescribing, you're then reliant on those being given out by the ward staff who have been stretched in very many directions. And then you get to hopefully whatever you've prescribed, you've managed to get as far as that reaching the patient. You've then obviously got, is the patient feeling up to wanting to drink or eat? People's appetites tend to be so low that actually it's very hard to encourage them to eat unfamiliar food that might not be the tastiest food in the world from the hospital kitchen, or they may not want to take one of the high calorie nutritional supplement drinks because again, the way that they're often served within the hospital is not the ideal. It's not how you would probably want them in real life. So there's a huge number of challenges in trying to help the hospital patients meet their nutritional requirements. And then on top of that, they might be feeling nauseous, they might not have very much appetite, they may be constipated, not feeling like eating. So it really is a tricky environment and a hard situation to work around.
I can imagine. I need to stop being selfish because I could take us down this rabbit hole for a really long time.
Yeah.
I'm very aware that we've got quite a few people tuned in, which, guys, again, welcome on board. I do appreciate it. So I thought we could probably direct this back to child nutrition, which is the topic of the day. Yeah. So this conversation initially came about because myself and you were conversing, and I just asked what you've been up to recently.
Yeah.
And you mentioned with the Thrive Tribe, which you said is the private company with which you're working at the minute, you have an initiative at the moment, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be engaging with schools to have sort of school-based direction towards healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. So I was just kind of wanting to ask you about that a little bit. Like, what actually does that entail? What is the program that, in fact, we'll take a step back. If you were to design a program for schools, which obviously you've done, what things are you looking at? Where are you starting with that? How does the process of that design actually come about?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we started doing this within Thrive Tribe was because we were running the weight management program for children, and it was really apparent that actually, although we were sort of treating the children who'd become above a healthy weight, there was very little going on within schools that we felt was of kind of good quality and good information in terms of prevention of obesity. And once we started sort of scratching the surface a little bit more as to what some of these children that we were working with were up against, it became apparent that actually the school dining environments, for example, they didn't really want to eat in those. There was setups in some of the secondary schools where pupils have sort of coffee shop, almost like Costa Starbucks type coffee shop setups, where they're able to buy sausage rolls, pizzas, muffins, all sorts of things mid-morning for about £1.50, which just absolutely horrified me. And there seemed to be quite an obesogenic environment around schools. that really wasn't helping these children that we were then seeing and trying to treat the fact that they were above a healthy weight. Physical activity wasn't being provided particularly well. And the other thing that I think was really apparent was that these children and young people, they often have lots of problems around self-esteem, their mental health, their mental well-being as well. So we took a step back really, and it became quite apparent that we wanted to have very much a whole schools approach, so that we weren't just trying to sort of treat these one or two children who were presenting to us who were above a healthy weight. We wanted to be able to go back and try and prevent more children from becoming overweight, but we realised probably the only way we could do this was we needed to get everybody within the school environment on board. So the head teachers, the PTA, the school dinner ladies, the pupils, because it doesn't work. We didn't feel that if you do it in isolation with just one group of pupils or just the pupils alone.
No, I mean, this is something that I think we talk about a lot, and I think the fitness industry is quite good at speaking about this, actually. It's this idea that in order for the obesity crisis, shall we say, to be reverted, there needs to be more than just like one or two little pockets of activity. Yeah. Not necessarily enough for school to ban vending machines with Coke cans in, and then for this to be put in and that to be put in. There needs to be this wholesale almost attitude change from everybody top down and bottom up to actually start this, because as you say there, if you're going in with all of these ideas and then you don't get buy-in from the staff, the staff aren't going to be supporting it, they're not going to be encouraging the kids to participate, and it's all kind of going to fall apart. How did you find that the take-up was? Did you find that there was much resistance, or?
So we were given some funding to roll out a project, and we had some schools who were biting our hand off, kept coming to us saying, we definitely want you involved. And they tend to be the schools who obviously got a very good either head teacher or head of PHSE. But as part of the funding, we were also funded to run the project in some schools from more deprived local areas, because we know there's a higher incidence of obesity within those schools. And those schools, it did take a lot more to try and get people on board, to try and get them to understand what we're doing. I think with any organisation, those schools are relatively large organisations, and with any organisation you're going, there'll be a number of people who are really, really keen, and there'll be a number of people who aren't really very keen. And equally, often that comes down to people also looking at their own weight as adults. If people often aren't ready to address their own weight and they've got issues going on there, they then are not always on board with trying to sort of help with the children and things as well. So in the schools that we had good buy-in from and good support from the top down, really, we were able to get everybody on board, school dinner ladies, the teaching staff. We set up groups of children who were sort of like young health champions. So we had one from each class where they were able to spread the word within their classes as well. Looking to get parents on board as well, because obviously without the parents, then the whole thing sort of falls to pieces as soon as the child leaves the school environment.
Yeah, well. very much so. So how would the program work? Is it sort of drip fed education over a period of time? Is it an ongoing thing, or is it an immediate intervention?
So there's different levels. So depending on budget, really. So schools can choose to have us in to very much set up the whole schools approach. So we'll work with them to set up their group of young people and their health champions and provide them training, and we can do an assessment initially to look at where we feel the biggest needs are within that school. In some cases it's really simple things, like there's no fresh drinking water provision in terms of water fountains within the school. In others we might go in and think actually the school dining environment is really poor and there's nowhere for children to sit and actually eat their lunch in a good environment. It might be that there's not very much PE going on. In some schools, if they've got a very high instance of smoking amongst parents, we might look at the smoking side of things. So we'll do an assessment and decide where we feel the needs are of that school. what they feel as well. So some schools might ask us in, for example, to look at the packed lunch policy, because they might be struggling to implement a packed lunch policy within the school, and they want us in to help them. So we can do quite a high level of input, or equally we can go down and they can buy packages from us. So if they feel, for example, they want to address mental well-being, we offer programs around sleep and helping children to sleep and looking at better sleep environments. And again, we know there's a strong link between sleep and childhood obesity. If children who don't get enough sleep, there is a link with them being above a healthy weight as well. So they can choose to have that as sort of a package as well if they want to address one specific issue.
Cool. Within the schools you've worked, because obviously the specific problems are going to, of course, vary based on location, based on teachers and whatnot. What would you say are sort of the top 3 things that you'll tend to find schools usually get wrong? Like, is there a pattern there? And if so, what would you do about those things in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the schools who are getting it wrong, or I don't know if it's just.
No, to rephrase, what issues do you tend to find the most?
So packed lunches are a huge one. The number of children who are bringing packed lunch into schools where the packed lunch is of a very poor nutritional quality and is packed full of high calorie, high sugar, high fat snacks, and the packed lunch is actually of very little nutritional value. So I think packed lunches are one thing that really, really do need addressing and need looking at. But that's a really hard one because you need the buy-in from the parents for that. And recently a school near where I live, rather than sort of a school we've been working with, but they'd brought in a packed lunch policy and it hit our local press. And I was just reading some of the comments underneath that had come in from parents, and I actually couldn't believe what I was reading in terms of how horrified parents were that a school was trying to tell them that they should be providing their children with healthier options. I mean, there was absolute outrage. So that for me was really shocking, because I thought we are totally up against it here if parents aren't going to support those type of initiatives. So packed lunches are a really big issue. Physical activity in schools. Again, I think physical activity in schools is nowhere near enough. There are lots of good initiatives starting to come in, things like the Daily Mile, and I think they are becoming more aware. But actually, when you look at how physically active children are during the day, very few of them are hitting their 60 active minutes, which is the recommended minimum amount of time that they should be active a day. And that doesn't happen. And you hear about PE lessons being cut for them doing all sorts of different things. You know, the school hall's being used for SATs, so they can't do PE, or
I remember when I was in secondary school, there was, if you did quite well in languages, they cut one of your PE lessons and you had to do more languages. Hold on, I wasn't that much into sport at the time, and obviously I wasn't doing the job I do now. I was like 14, but even at that point I was like, there's something wrong there. Like, there's something that seems odd. Yeah.
And that still happens, and I still hear lots of stories from within schools of that type of thing happening, which I think is a real shame. And also, teachers are, I'm not trying to blame teachers in this house, but often PE is something that is cut if they feel children are misbehaving. So they'll be told, well, you're not doing PE today because you've not been behaving properly. And I think that's a real shame for the children who really, not all children are academic, and for the children who really do thrive in PE and sport, they have that taken away from them, which is, I think, is wrong on so many different levels.
Yeah, that almost treats physical activity as it's a reward, it's a privilege, as opposed to something that's a necessity.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like a completely wrong angle to be taken.
Yeah, so I think that's another area that schools really need to look at. And the other thing we tend to focus on, the other topic that we tend to get asked to do the most is sugar. So looking at the sugar content of different foods, trying to teach pupils about how much sugar there are in different foods, getting them to understand why maybe it's not a good idea to be eating a large amount of sugar and sugary foods and sugary drinks. So they tend to be the 3 most popular topics that we get asked.
So I think it's worth just adding in there, because as soon as we mention that sugar is not necessarily a good thing, the fitness industry is going to get really annoyed and tell us that it's because of the calories and it's not because of the sugar. And I think it's worth sort of addressing the fact that yes, but high sugar foods tend to contain a lot of calories. And so it's still the case that advocating that children aren't given lots of high sugar, high fat snacks, that's not necessarily the demonization of the sugar and the fat. It's the demonization of the fact that these foods contain a lot of calories, and just snacking on them a lot is going to result in dental issues and potentially weight issues.
Yeah.
And so unless we're going to be getting kids to go onto MyFitnessPal and track their calorie intake, which is a really bad idea, instead manipulating food choice is the way to properly control their diet. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it's not about it's about trying to get children to understand more about a lot of the sugary foods and drinks that they might be choosing are very much empty calories. So it will just be the high sugar sweets and fizzy drinks that's not going to give them anything else nutritionally. So it's not about the calories and steering them away from all high calorie foods. It's just getting them to think a little bit more around. And again, when we teach this, we don't teach it as sugar as a sort of standalone. You know, we're trying to teach them more to think about having a varied diet and a wide variety of different foods. But it is getting them to understand that actually too much sugar and too many empty calorie type sugary foods, which tend to be the ones that they like, isn't really going to bring much to their health. And even if they're, you know, a healthy weight, even then having lots of sugary foods and empty calories isn't going to be a good idea. And like you said, the dental aspect of sugar and sugary foods is so important, because dental decay is the biggest reason that children are admitted to hospital in the UK for dental extractions. So
crazy.
Yeah, despite what is going on with their weight or what might be going on inside that they can't necessarily see, just what's happening to their teeth alone is a huge issue. So if we can prevent that by getting them to eat less sugar, that alone is going to be a benefit.
That is absolutely crazy. Is that like young people's adult teeth, or is that milk teeth? Or
no, it's their it's their milk teeth, but also their, you know, once they get their can't think what they call, you know, their adult teeth through, and they get it, you know, so much decay in their adult teeth, and then having to have them extracted because of the pain from the dental decay.
God, can you imagine having teeth out, like adult teeth out?
I know.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that alone to me is a good reason to get them to eat less sugar.
Yeah. So what? Jesus. So in there you brought up the issue with packed lunches, and I thought that's a really good segue, because the stuff you're doing with Thrive Tribe sounds really interesting. And I think some of the parents that will be listening to this, or the people who know parents that will be listening to this, will probably be thinking, well, what can we do as parents or as people that know parents to kind of help along with this? And I think that talking about the packed lunches is probably a good place to start with that. And then we can see where the conversation goes. Just before we quickly do though, we've got 16 participants on, which is really cool. Hello, everyone. Please do feel free to throw questions into the chat box. I've got a few questions here that we're going to ask when we sort of run out of conversation a little bit, or when we start to wind it down, because I'm very conscious that I don't want to keep Heather up. She's a very busy person.
Goes back very early.
If you've got any additional questions, please throw them into the chat and we will get to them eventually. So with packed lunches, what would you say is like the picture perfect ideal packed lunch that a child should be taking? And then what would you say is sort of a realistic stepping stone towards getting there? Like if you've got a parent who's like, well, my kid will just eat chocolate bars and crisps and biscuits and cake, how could they start to move further towards that hypothetical utopian ideal that'll probably never happen?
Yeah, I know. And just to say, you know, I am quite realistic in terms of, I've got 3 kids of my own, and although, you know, I can talk about sort of, oh, in the ideal world, they should all be eating this, and then I go to feed it to my 3 kids, and they all turn their noses up and wander off. Yeah. And so, yeah, I do know that it is really hard, and despite what we can talk about the ideal, I do know that it is very difficult to get there. So we usually talk around sort of a choosing 6 for success in terms of pack lunches, and getting parents to think about what they might put in a packed lunchbox. I think the biggest thing with packed lunches for me is just introducing some variety. So, because what you tend to find happens with packed lunches is that parents pack up exactly the same thing day after day, 5 days a week. So there's actually no variety in that, in the diet that they're getting at lunchtime. And again, that's very easy to do. And it might be simple things like if they're starting off, you know, they've got a white bread, maybe jam sandwich or Nutella sandwich, and a packet of crisps and a chocolate bar, and maybe, well, schools are becoming a little bit more stricter on juice drinks and things, but, you know, maybe a juice drink in there. And the child is having that 5 days a week. Obviously, that's not ideal. So probably just starting with small changes in terms of, you know, maybe looking, can they move on to a higher fibre type of bread, so maybe a whole grain bread or a seeded bread or something. But actually, if you're not going to be able to get there, just go to the 50-50 bread. If it's a step in the right direction and, you know, maybe trying to introduce some more fillings, then I'd probably be looking at some higher protein fillings in terms of what was in the sandwich, but just really trying to mix it up. So trying not to get stuck in the routine of every day of the week the child gets exactly the same in their packed lunch. And then again, you know, maybe trying to mix it up in terms of adding in some fruit and vegetables in a different format. And again, you know, it's can be quite hard with children, but they tend to like things like grapes, carrots, chopped up, but making it as easy for them to eat as possible, because children I've tended to find they're much less likely to eat, say, a whole apple. But if you put something in that's chopped up and ready and easy for them to eat, like maybe some little cubes of pineapple or chopped up carrot sticks, those type of things, you tend to find that they chopped up cucumber pieces, they're much more likely to eat that than if they have to, if it's an effort, I would say.
Okay.
I mean, there are, you know, there's lots of other things you can put in there, things like we would all, you know, in the ideal world would say go for like a plain unflavoured yogurt with some fresh fruit in a little tub. But again, we know that children might not go for that. So again, starting with sort of maybe a fruit yogurt that isn't containing too much sugar is a good step, because then you're providing them with some of their calcium.
I guess for that as well, like if you've got a busy parent, sort of maybe they're on their own or both parents work or something like that, just having those sort of, like as you say, a lower sugar yogurt with some fruit compote or something is still a better option than like a really crap yogurt.
Exactly.
And it doesn't take them as much time to get the pot, prepare the thing, and then when they get home, they don't have to clean the pot, etc.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It is kind of, it's working within the parents' capabilities as well as what the kids are not going to just throw on the floor.
Yeah, 100%. Because there's nothing worse than as a parent, putting loads of time and effort into providing this most amazingly nutritionally complete packed lunch, and then it comes back home again in the packed lunch box because the child's not touched it because they don't like any of the food. So
they swap it for a sausage roll.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a cake. So it's definitely about, you know, just thinking of being realistic about what your child is going to eat. But as much as possible, I would just say step one for me would be just try and add in the variety, and then try and make sure they've always got some protein in their packed lunch if possible. Try and make sure they've got some sort of fruit and vegetable in that packed lunch if possible. Try to ensure there's some sort of starchy carbohydrate. So again, you know, if you go on these things and you look at packed lunch ideas, and there'll all be all these fancy pasta salads and those type of things, again, it's just about being realistic. You know, we haven't all got time to do that in the morning. But again, things like pasta salads can work really well for children if they enjoy eating pasta. So yeah, I think it's just mixing up really.
Nice one. So outside of that, initially you said that a lot of the time you'll see children will come to school with packed lunches that are essentially full of snacks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the snack thing is something that's definitely worth considering, because my usual advice to clients or to students that work with clients is that if someone is trying to lose fat as an adult, just don't snack. Snacking is not necessary, you don't need to. But as far as I'm aware, the picture's slightly different with children because they've got smaller stomachs and energy output and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm under the impression that snacking is something that's not a necessity, but it's quite useful in children. And that brings in the snack cupboard that parents will often have. And I only know this, like, please don't take this as judgmental. Obviously, I'm not a parent. But often when I will tell their parents, well, just don't snack, it'll help you with weight loss, blah, blah, blah. Their first response is, well, I need to have the snack cupboard because I've got the kids. So how do you talk to children around healthy snacking? Because I think that's the main issue. I don't think, obviously I'm going to be making generalizations, do correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think most parents don't know that crisps and cakes and biscuits aren't great snacks. I think they just will often have problems with getting their children to accept that sometimes they have to have something else.
Yeah.
How could you go around that conversation?
Yeah. I mean, this is a tricky one, and we try to differentiate thinking about snack foods and treat foods. So not always getting people to fall into thinking that a snack has to be a treat food, because so easily I think people tend to go for the more what I'd consider a treat food. So things like chocolate bars, biscuits, crisps, they think of those as being the things that they should offer as a snack. Whereas actually it's trying to start to think of other ideas for things that they can offer for a snack. I mean, children do have smaller stomachs than adults, so they will get hungrier more often. And you do find when children come in from school, they're absolutely starving, hungry, desperate. And I think having that treat cupboard that so many people talk about, that is full of things like crisps and biscuits and cakes, all of us know if we came in from school or a day at work or wherever starving, hungry, and you've got that cupboard there in front of you, that's what you're going to eat. So when we work with families, we try to say that actually those foods should be restricted to 5 times a week in terms of things like crisps, biscuits, chocolate bars, sweets and chocolates. 5 of those a week is plenty, and that's how many that should be restricted to. And we talk about managing that in a different way. So it may be that children are allowed to choose their 5 treats at the beginning of the week, and they can put that in a little tin that's theirs to keep, and then once that's gone, that's gone. Some children, when we work with that, we work with vouchers as well. So we would make little vouchers that we give them, and they can swap those 5 times a week for a snack or a treat. But again, that's their 5 for a week. And then we start to work with families to think about different types of snacks that they can offer in that place. It's actually going to fill them up. Things like a small bowl of cereal with milk, as long as it's not a high sugar cereal, that's quite a good snack for a child to have if they're hungry, or even another, like a little, small sandwich. That's going to be a much healthier, filling, nutritious snack for them to have than just filling up again on sort of empty calories from things like crisps and chocolate bars and biscuits. If they like, the rice cakes and some peanut butter on top or some fruit on top, again, that can be a good snack. Things like pita and hummus as well, but just getting them to move away from always thinking what I would consider more treat foods to be the only options for snacks.
It's cool. I really like 2 things that you said there. I really like the differentiation between treat foods and snack foods, because that is offering it's offering a separation between the two without using moralistic terms. Yeah. It's not calling them good or bad. Yeah. It's saying they're both just foods, but they are still falling in different categories, and so that they're differentially appropriate depending on the time. I think that's brilliant. And I also really like the tin idea, or the voucher idea, whichever way it does, because of course this is teaching kids to be autonomous. This is almost the same principle as giving them pocket money. Yeah. And it's learning how to budget what you've got and spread it out. So it's not restricting, but it's like, eat them all today if you want. Yeah. But it's all you're getting. Yeah, and exactly. I suppose the difficult thing would be with that is if the kids eat them all on Monday and they get to Friday and they're really whining about it. I can imagine that's going to be very difficult. But I suppose if parents really stick to their guns, I think that could be a really, really, that's a really cool strategy. I like that. I'm gonna use that.
And what we do is when we're working with the, say we're talking to a family about that, and children, we'll actually try and encourage the parents to do it as well. So it's not just the child who's got their treat box, it's always also the parents. You say, well, you can, the whole family can have their 5 treats. It's not just the children who have to do it, the adults can do it as well. Mm-hmm. And actually then you can remove the need for the treat cupboard that is just a big old free-for-all for everybody. There's no need for that to be in a house. And you all manage your little treat box. And often the parents struggle with that more than the children. But I think if you if you talk to the children and explain why you're doing it and you're setting the ground rules, they do tend to work quite well within those boundaries.
Yeah, I suppose as well, if you did it with the kids and you didn't do it with the parents, like, kids aren't stupid, they'd notice that that's not fair. And
yeah.
One thing that I was really wanting to talk to you, which was actually my next question, is it would be cool to just ask you to talk a little bit around the idea of modelling and how the parents' behaviour modelling and how much that influences the child's behaviour. Because from everything that I've ever read
mm-hmm.
about childhood health interventions, childhood nutrition interventions, all of that, it seems to come down to essentially the kids will do what the parents will do.
Yeah.
And if you're not, one thing that I found was that parents will often eat really good meals with their kids, but then parents will have really bad snacks. Mm-hmm. And that snacking behaviour is picked up by the children, and that was one of the things that contributed to their later obesity. So could you just talk around that?
Yeah.
Please.
I mean, modelling and the environment and behaviour that children see within their home is huge in influencing their behaviour. And I think it's difficult in so many ways. We know that if children are above a healthy weight, they're likely to have a parent, at least one parent, who is also above a healthy weight. And so again, when we're sort of working with families, we like to take very much a sort of whole family approach. But this is often quite difficult for the parents because it's getting them to look at their own behaviours and their own patterns of eating, like you say, and their own beliefs around exercise and physical activity as well. And some of the barriers that they might be putting in place to change their own behaviours and how that actually then might be impacting on the children. So we will talk to parents, it's about simple things like if you're about trying new foods, not turning your nose up always at foods that you think you don't like, widening the variety of foods that you might be willing to try, getting involved in cooking, getting involved in trying new foods, pretending that you like foods, even if you really don't, but just so children start to think, oh, hang on a minute, Dad said he never liked that food, but actually he's given it a go, he's tried it, so maybe I will as well, and he seemed to get on all right with it. So that's a huge thing, as well as where we're then talking, like you were saying, about often the parents having lots of snacks and lots of treats and saying, oh, I can't possibly get rid of those, or lots of fizzy drinks around in the house, and talking to them about actually becoming healthier as a family as a whole. So we'll do things like have a reward chart, but it won't just be for the child, it will be for the whole family, and they all have to set their own goals on that. So the children can see that mum and dad might be trying to do physical activity every day for 60 minutes as well. And it works, any sort of healthy lifestyle intervention that you're trying to do works so much better if you have got the whole family on board and you've got everybody's buy-in to it, rather than the child feeling that either they're doing it on their own and they'll be made to do something different to the rest of the family. But, and I said, but the biggest thing you can do is really to look like you enjoy trying a wide variety of foods, you enjoy trying different foods, you are willing to go on whatever journey the child is going on with them as well, and changing your own behaviour.
Awesome. With that, though, of course, brings up the question of, often when we see people who have issues around body confidence and body image and stuff, they will often say, oh, my parent was always trying to lose weight, my parent was always dieting, my parent was always really health focused. So how do you toe the line between those two things of trying to model good behaviour while also not overtly telling your child that you're trying to lose weight? Or is there a way that you can do that in a way that's not potentially damaging? I don't like to give off the idea that children are all just eating disorders waiting to happen.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's some concern there that's definitely warranted.
I think it's about, you know, having those conversations about why you're trying to eat a healthier lifestyle or live a healthier lifestyle, sorry. And it's not always down to weight. So yes, part of it might be down to you're trying to eat healthier or do more physical activity because you might want to lose weight. But also it's about getting them to understand that it's not just about weight, it's about being healthier in later life, trying to keep your body as healthy as possible, you know, thinking about heart health. Things like with teenagers, we tend to find focusing on the short-term benefits of healthy living tend to work better. You know, things like it will improve your skin, it will improve your hair, not just thinking about, oh, everything has to always come back to weight, thinking about some of the other benefits. And particularly with their parents as well, you know, talking to them about, obviously, that you want them to be as fit and healthy as possible so they can do lots of activities with you. I mean, some children do grow up seeing their mum or dad always on a diet and always really restricting their food intake, but we wouldn't necessarily talk about it in terms of restricting things. We're often talking about it as, you know, trying to think of healthier alternatives. What can you make swaps for? What you might need to cut out, but actually what can you
do instead?
Yeah.
Awesome. So it seems to be the case that if you can make the focus around health, daily activity, and how energized you feel, and all of these kinds of things, then it obviously gives a more positive message, which I suppose makes perfect sense. I think with the last question that I had down here before I got a few questions that people have asked us already. Again, guys in the chat, if you want to throw some questions in, please do. But the last one I had here was, how can you talk to children about their weight?
Now, okay, so this is quite a controversial topic. Having worked on a children's weight management program, we would initially always be, so all correspondence goes via the parents initially, and children are heighted and weighted and measured in year 6 and reception class at the moment. So letters would go back to parents, if we're just using this as an example, telling them that their child might be above a healthy weight and would they like to contact the service for more help and support. And we used to get so many angry phone calls from parents saying, how dare you tell me my child is overweight? You know, you're going to give them an eating disorder. And actually saying to them, okay, we're going to have this conversation with you, and then we'll talk to your child. We're not going to say to them necessarily that they're above a healthy weight. We'll be talking to them about how they can make changes to their lifestyle to make themselves healthier. But, you know, often children aren't silly, and they know that if they do tend to know if they are bigger than the other children in their class, and they do, you know, children are cruel to one another as well. You know, they probably are being teased and about their weight. And actually, when you sit down with them and talk to them about things like in terms of how do they feel in terms of self-confidence, and how do they feel in terms of being able to engage in physical activity at school and those type of things, children will be very honest with you, and they will have conversations, and they will talk to you about their self-confidence and say that they want to be able to wear the same clothes that their friends are wearing, or, you know, they don't want to be teased in the playground anymore. So that often tends to give you an in for the conversation, to talk to them about how they are feeling. But we would very much sort of let the conversation be led by the child. The other way that we tend to address it would be by using the BMI charts for children. And actually by using those, you can plot on those where a child is in terms of their height and weight and BMI. And actually, because they've got the curves on for where they should be to be a healthy weight, you can use that to show them and say to the child, look, this is where you are on the chart, and this is ideally where we would like you to be. And obviously we're going to do everything we can to help you move towards that. But that tends to be a very good factual way of addressing the issue. And you're not then putting your own, you know, you're not saying to them, oh, I think you're above a healthy weight, or I think you're overweight. You've kind of got the facts in front of you. But and I think we shouldn't shy away from having those difficult conversations, because so often people, I would say, not people, but particularly within the health industry in terms of school nurses and GPs. They don't want to offend the parents. So actually the issue is just left and is never said and is never raised. So actually what happens is these children suddenly turn up to a service where they've got to the point where they're morbidly obese, because they've gone past the just being overweight stage and the obese stage on the charts, and nobody's ever actually addressed the situation until it's so blatantly obvious that something has to be done. But by the time they get to that point, you know, we're fighting a losing battle, really. So I think we do have to be braver about having those conversations, but just making sure that we are having them in the right way.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you sort of saying just talk to them kind of like an adult. Like,
yeah,
I've said this before, because, like, again, I will say I'm not a parent, but I have spoken to children, and they're not stupid. Like, no. People say, like, oh, he's just a kid, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, of course, kids are immature and stuff, but if you talk, like, sit down and really talk to, like, a 7-year-old, you can have a full conversation with a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
They'll probably tell you stuff you don't know because they just remember shit. But yeah, I think that's a great point. If you can just have a factual based, honest conversation, then there's only so much that can come out of it, because exactly as you say, kids know.
Yeah, they do. They really do.
Other kids on the playground have told them already.
Yeah, and I think it's the parents often tend to be trying to protect them, but often by trying to protect them from that, they just shy away from the issue, and then it just slowly becomes worse and worse. And actually, you know, if we were able to start to work with these children just when they start to hit the sort of overweight stage on their BMI charts, just by holding their weight steady at that stage, by a few changes, we can get them back to a healthy weight really easily. But unfortunately, what happens is kind of people skirt around and don't want to address the issue until it becomes such a big problem. Then, you know, we really are having to work really hard with those children to get their weight coming back in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how easy it is to lose 3 or 4 pounds and how hard it is to lose a lot more than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So Lawrence Small has asked a really cool question. So I think we'll just move on to questions now. So Lawrence has said, what are your thoughts on banning advertising for high-calorie foods like McDonald's being targeted at children? Is this effective, or should it be more about education for children or what they should be eating? I would also add to that, should it be more education towards parents? Is education, I'm going to do air quotes even though I hate when people do that, is that actually the answer, or is some kind of legislation warranted?
Oh, yeah.
In your opinion?
In my opinion, yes. So I think it's probably a bit of a combination of both, and a little bit depends on the age of the children, because obviously up to a point, what children are eating and what they are being bought and what parents are choosing for them is actually being done by the parents rather than by the child. So I think we need to look at what is going on as a whole in terms of unhealthy foods. I mean, and the other problem with things like McDonald's and the fast food is it is so affordable and it is so cheap compared to other foods that you can buy. And it definitely does, you know, that I've got 2 teenage boys, and given their own money, they'll be straight off down to McDonald's. And that's despite me telling them, you know, that it's not the healthiest option to have. So I think it's multifactorial, really. I think we do need to look at how things are advertised. I mean, Happy Meals and the way that they link up to often the latest film release, and there's a toy and those type of thing. Obviously that starts to appeal to children from a very young age. And then moving forwards, once they start to get to sort of teenage years and they've got their own money, and it tends to be, I think then it tends to be a little bit more about peer pressure, but the fact they can go there and buy a whole meal, and it is food that is appealing and tastes nice to them. But then obviously you have got the whole point of parents then taking their children off to McDonald's or wherever as a bit of a treat as well. You know, it's often a treat sort of activity that people tend to do as a family. So I don't know whether banning advertising would have a huge impact, because I think organisations like McDonald's are so well established within our society now, that I don't know whether advertising is stopping the advertising is the answer. I think it is about education. I mean, although I say my children will sort of go there, they're obviously not there all the time, and they understand that it should be part of a balance and everything else that is going on.
I said something relatively similar to some of that on Ben's podcast a while ago, when we were talking about a similar thing, and I was like, advertising doesn't change your behaviour all that much.
No.
Like, I always feel that whenever we're like, oh, we're going to ban advertising, that's essentially, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but that sounds like the government pretending that they're trying to do something about it, when actually it's not. That's not tackling the issue. That's tackling the part of the issue that's easy to tackle.
Yeah.
Because as you say, McDonald's it's already there. I mean, you can take Tony the Tiger off of a box of Frosties.
Yeah.
It's still Frosties, and kids are still going to want Frosties because they've had Frosties before. And if they haven't had Frosties before, their friends have, and they'll tell them about them.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So I'm very much with you there. And whether I think education's the answer or not, I'm not sure, because again, as you say, your kids go to McDonald's, but they know that that's not the healthy option.
Yeah.
And people do stuff that they know is not that great for them all the time.
I mean, if you just think of just any of the public health messages that we've had in the UK, just like you could go and speak to anybody in the street and say, how many portions of fruit and vegetables should you have a day? And I would say 9 people out of 10 will say 5. Everybody knows the message, it's been drummed into people. But then you say to the general public, how many portions of fruit and vegetables do you have a day? Probably 3, 4 out of 10 will say 5. So although I think we can try really hard with public health messaging and that type of thing, and education as well, I mean, I hate to say it as somebody who works within public health, but I don't always think that that's the answer either, really.
Yeah,
Sadly.
I actually have that pulled up on a bookmark. So 30% of adults, 41% of older adults meet 5 a day. Boys and girls aged 11 to 18 have 3 and 2.7 portions per day, respectively.
Yeah. So the message is out there and it's been drummed into people, but people still aren't doing it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I did a talk at the BTN conference last year, just highlighting some of that, and my ultimate sort of point that I made was that if this is going to be improved, then it sounds like I'm trying to sell nutrition coaching, but a more individualized approach is going to be necessary, because it's not that people don't know, it's that people don't know how to apply. And I think that the way that is going to happen has to be individual, because the reason that someone will go to McDonald's is so different for different people, as just as one example, that will never be solved, in my opinion, by a government drive. It's going to be more by people such as yourself in the trenches, working with parents, with schools, and in these communities with people, as opposed to just, McDonald's isn't good for you. For everyone to go, well, yeah.
Yes.
It's not why I'm here.
Yeah.
Cool. So a couple of other questions. Some of these are going to be completely off topic. Not off topic, but off the beaten track so far.
Because they're properly testing my knowledge, are they?
Yeah, so quick fire. No, just one person asked about baby-led weaning and whether that is, she said, I've just written baby-led weaning down, but she said that she's planning on breastfeeding exclusively for 6 months and then isn't sure what to do then. What would your suggestion generally be in that case?
Yeah, so baby-led weaning is where the stage between where a child has been exclusively on the milk and then starting to introduce the foods, different textures, different tastes, to start, and with the aim being of weaning that you're going to establish them onto a normal family varied diet. And weaning sort of the more traditional method of weaning tends to be where parents are making purees of different types of food to start with their baby, to get them used to the different tastes, textures, feel of food in their mouth. Baby-led weaning is still very similar, but with more of a focus on offering foods for the baby to start to pick up, choose themselves, eat themselves, that they're sort of a little bit more, rather than sort of somebody sitting spoon feeding a baby with whatever sort of puree, that the baby has a little bit more of a control over what they're choosing, what they're eating, how much they're having.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of the best method of weaning, I think it's probably going to be about whatever works well for you and your baby, with the ultimate aim being really that you are offering a wide variety of choice and textures and flavours to the baby. And actually, I would maybe even go for a little bit of a combination of the two. So still sort of having the puree type foods that you've made, where you are going to still be offering those to the baby on the spoon and letting them have some of that, but then maybe having some sort of soft finger food type foods around that the baby can pick up and chew and eat themselves as well. So I would probably be aiming for a little bit of a combination of both. I think when you're weaning your first baby, I mean, I can remember doing this, it feels really daunting and quite stressful, and not always knowing what to do and what to offer. But actually it doesn't need to be like that. It can be quite a simple, quite easy process. And I mean, there's lots of really good literature and information out there. Annabelle Carmel tends to be the sort of go-to guru of weaning, and if you want, depending on how not strict you want to be, but she has set like menu plans and timetables for doing it, which some parents, if they are feeling a little bit nervous and anxious about it, that can be quite a helpful route to go down. But equally, just sort of doing your own thing and pureeing up whatever vegetables you're having for your meals can be just as beneficial.
Awesome, thank you very much. How do you spell Annabelle Carmel? Carmel's name.
I think it's Karmel.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, so the next question was, someone is potentially considering raising their child as vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
I think answering this question about vegan too would be useful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect you to fully flesh out this approach on this podcast, because I can imagine that will be quite a long-winded conversation. Mm-hmm. But where can people go to find out more information about that kind of thing? Where can they find out how to do that? And also, I suppose, just to make the podcast useful, just a couple of main tips that you would give.
Yeah, so I mean, there's absolutely no reason why a child can't be raised on a vegetarian or vegan diet and still be getting everything that they need in terms of their nutrients for growth and development. I would say probably the key things that I would focus in on would be just making sure that they're getting a variety of diet, obviously, and making sure that they are getting a wide range of foods, but particularly focusing in, I would say, on the iron content. So just making sure that they are getting enough iron in their diet if they're not having any meat, red meat, which traditionally tends to be our sort of good source of iron. So maybe looking at things like fortified cereals, dark green leafy vegetables, things like apricots, figs, prunes, including those in the diet. There is a little bit of guidance now that if you are going to be including those sort of dried fruits, that you include them as a meal rather than as a snack. Again, that just comes back to the dental decay side of things. Looking at things like beans and lentils as well. And so I'd be particularly wanting to just check the iron content of the diet, just check the protein content of the diet as well, just making sure that they were getting other protein sources. But for those who are vegetarian, obviously that can be things like eggs or dairy, your beans, your lentils, your pulses again. If you're wanting to use soya substitutes for meat or tofu, those type of things, they can be really good. So they would be the kind of two main concerns. In terms of vegan, you just need to check the B12 status, just making sure, probably actually for children, if you were vegan, they would need a B12 supplement. So just making sure they're getting some sort of B12 supplement in terms of being vegan. The only other thing really to just be aware of is children do have very small stomachs, and often some of the foods that they might be eating in terms of vegan, vegetarian diet might be quite high in fibre. So just trying to make sure that they're not getting full quickly from the fibre and actually not getting enough in terms of calories and more nutrient dense foods. So just making sure that there's that balance really between the sort of high fibre foods that might be more prevalent in a vegan and vegetarian diet, and that they're still getting adequate calories in as well.
Cool. That's all fairly logical tips, to be honest. Is there any way you would recommend that they look for further information if they've got any further questions?
I mean, I'd probably have a look. The Vegetarian Society have lots of information. I haven't looked on NHS Choices, just whether they've got anything specific in terms of children. But I mean, it would be the same principles in terms of what constitutes a healthy vegetarian diet, but obviously just for children instead of for adults. They would probably be the first two
Cool.
starting places. Yeah.
I imagine that would get you off on a nice little rabbit hole you could look down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So on that, there's two things that you mentioned there that could segue into the next question, but we'll ask the first one. Someone asked a question about a 26-month-old. Is there a particular kind of vitamin that they should be taking? Because I'm aware that children under a given age are usually recommended supplements. Does it kind of matter what brand you get, or just children's supplements tend to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, under the age of 5 years, it's recommended that children are all taking a supplement containing vitamins A, C and D. So they're the kinds of key things. And particularly, I think it's up to the age of 5, particularly because this is the time, sort of tends to be the age that they might be being fussy eaters, might not be eating a huge variety of foods. They suddenly might be going off certain foods, or their intake might be going up and down. So it's just really a bit of a good coverall just to make sure that they are getting those essential vitamins in, really.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what I would be wanting to do is just look at getting a varied diet in. And actually, if you're managing to get a child to eat a good varied diet, the likelihood is that they're going to be getting enough of those nutrients in, probably with the exception of vitamin D. But, you know, if you're managing to get them to eat a good varied diet, then that's going to be the best thing you can do. But in terms of which supplement to go for, I mean, I would really say that there's a wide variety out there, and it's going to be what works for you and your child. There's drops that you can use if they're not very good at taking tablets or supplements in others forms. There's some supplements that are more like a sweet that you can use, but again, some people don't like the idea of that because they feel that it's getting their child to have a sweet essentially to do something healthy. There's syrups you can use. Again, there's a huge range out there. There's some that contain omega-3 to help with brain development, which is, in some people think, thought to be helpful for children. There's some that contain probiotics. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's one that is much better than others. I would probably say it's going to come down to, and there's some which are very expensive and some that aren't. I mean, personally, if I was choosing, I would probably just go for one of the supermarket chemist's sort of own brand that contains a good combination of the three, rather than worrying about going for anything sort of super expensive or scientific sounding, really.
I don't think you can really argue with that. I think that's a fairly decent recommendation. So the other side of it was, someone mentioned that they've got a 7-year-old who's got a particularly low appetite. She's healthy, she's active, but she is underweight for her height. And she's, as I say, got a very low appetite. What would your recommendations be in that situation? Because I know that sometimes kids' appetites can just go down and then they'll come up again, and it's something that I learned recently was that it's actually really normal for kids to some days eat loads and then some days basically not eat anything. Like that's just a normal kid thing that they do just to piss you off. But in this situation, obviously that's going on for a little bit longer. So what would be the things to look out for there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing to do would just be to check that there was no underlying reason for their poor appetite. So I'd probably just suggest that they go and see their GP, school nurse, or how old were they? So 7, weren't they?
7.
Just to check everything's okay. And when we're working with children who are whose appetite is poor, the other thing we would just check is that they're not. So some children are just going to be a lower weight, just like some adults will be. Yeah. But if the child is going along their growth curve and following the same centile growth curve, then that's not usually as much of a concern. It tends to be more of a concern if their weight starts to drop away from their centile curve, and then that would be more of a red flag, really, that there might be something not quite right.
So just so I understand that one. So that would be if they're staying the same amount of underweight, that's just a person that's going to be lighter. But if it's gradually getting more and more away from where they should be, then that's very concerned with.
Yeah, and if they start sort of moving away from the curve, the curve's going along and they're sort of moving away from the curve, then that would be more of a concern and more of a red flag. And I think in terms of appetite and working with people who haven't got a great appetite, often the best thing to do there is little and often. So not expecting them to sit down and eat a big meal. Some people just aren't designed like that. Some people do just respond better to having small amounts regularly. So probably every 2 to 3 hours, having a small snack or a small amount of food, but just trying to make sure that whatever that is really is as nutritious as possible. And not, particularly with children, as tempting as it is if you know that they're going to eat something, but not falling into the trap of just trying to get crisps and biscuits and high calorie foods into them, just thinking a little bit more about something that's going to be a bit more all round nutritious as well. So even if they only eat a very small bit of something like a sandwich, maybe offering the next bit of that a couple of hours later and just splitting it up through the day. Children do have a funny way of sorting themselves out, and you think that they're eating a terribly restricted diet, and actually when you look at it, they are quite often managing to find themselves a little something from each food group to eat. But it can be really quite stressful for parents, and it can be really hard dealing with a child who's got a low appetite or is a very eating a restricted intake. But I would probably just first step just to check that everything's okay and rule out anything underlying, just go off to the GP and just get them to check sort of growth charts, centile charts, just to make sure that they're following their curves okay.
Yeah, I can imagine that's really reassuring. I mean, there was a study came out about a week ago, and some people were kicking up a stink about it online because it mentioned that obesity was related to genes, and people don't like it when you talk about that because it has to be their fault. But what the study was showing was that essentially that while there are some genes that relate to obesity and all of that, they've now highlighted that there are some genes that also correlate to being underweight yet really healthy. So it is the case that there are some outliers for the normal weight charts, but as you mentioned, it's worth getting checked out. And then I quite like the idea of just more often.
Just little bits, little nutritious bits every 2 to 3 hours, and often by doing that you can start to stimulate the stomach and start to stimulate the appetite. That would be the type of the way that we would work with adults, particularly like older adults who've lost their appetite, or patients who've been poorly with different illnesses where they've lost their appetite. It's just starting to stimulate the appetite in the stomach into eating again.
Cool. All right, nice one. So I really don't want to keep for too much longer, but if it's okay, there's a couple more questions for about 15 more minutes.
Yeah.
Cool. So everyone in the chat, apologies, but we can't really take any more questions. If you want to submit some, please do drop me an email on tom@bencoomber.com if you've got anything else you want to know, and we will get back to you if we can. So I've got one question, and Rad from the BTN Academy. Radamira has submitted 4. So we'll try and get through these. So Rad says, if I'm not wrong, the BTN Academy notes state that, so for the listeners that don't know, Heather wrote the BTN Academy. So in the BTN Academy notes, it stated that toddlers up to 1 year do not need additional fluid except the milk/formula and then additional fluid from complementary foods or purees and stuff. I have a 9-month-old nephew, and some days he can drink up to 2 bottles of a children's tea, which totals 360 mils of liquid. Would you say this would be an issue, or is this not something to really worry about?
So
that's all the detail I have.
Okay. So children are, if they're being breastfed, they're probably going to be exclusively breastfed up until the age of about 6 months. So that would be all the fluid they would need at that point. If children babies are being formula fed, up to about 6 months, they'd be reliant on their milk. And then once you start weaning them, they would still be you would be gradually decreasing down the amount of milk that you were offering them as you were increasing up the amount of food that they would be coming established on, because at first it's just for first taste. So the 2 would be slowly titrated against the other. And once you start weaning, we usually recommend that you would still offer water as a drink or as a fluid. So cool boiled water can be offered as a drink alongside the milk that they're having. In terms of drinking that much additional fluid, I think it would be a problem depending on whether it's impacting on their appetite. Mm-hmm. So because they have only got small stomachs, obviously if they're filling up on a lot of fluid, that probably is going to be impacting on how much they're then wanting to eat. And did you say it was a children's tea?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't believe Rad's from the UK.
Okay. So I mean, I'm not familiar with the children's tea, but I wouldn't think that that's going to have a huge amount of nutrition in. No. So my main concern there would be if the tea was impacting on the appetite and how much they were then wanting to eat, and also what other fluids they were having. So we would normally be expecting the child still to have some other sort of formula milk at that stage. So just it would be the nutritional component of the tea and what impact that volume was going to be having on their appetite.
Sure. So in brief, probably not the worst thing in the world, but probably also not the best. Might be worth reducing it a little bit.
Yeah, I would be looking to reduce down the volume and the amount that they were having, and making sure that it wasn't instead of more nutritious, either fluid or food.
Cool. Okay, so she's asked, when would you recommend to add salt, pepper and herbs to food? I do know that just to save us some time, I do know that if you go onto the UK, in fact, I think if you just Google UK children's salt recommendations, it will give you the recommendations there. I found that earlier today. It's something like, off the top of my head, it's about 1 gram.
Yeah,
a day, I think, for a child under 1.
And you don't really need to be adding any additional salt to children's food at any age, really. Herbs would be fine.
Yeah, she also mentions pepper, herbs, and so flavourings and things that will increase the flavour. Is that something you would really worry about giving to children prior to weaning, because they don't really, you just eat what you give them?
So herbs and spices are going to be fine, and during the weaning process. So once you've got past the sort of first steps of weaning, and you're moving on to increasing their taste and their flavours, it's absolutely fine to start to introduce them to different flavours, different herbs, different mild spices, to get them used to a wide variety of different foods. The problem with salt is that the kidneys can't always cope with higher levels of salt. So that's why salt is more of a concern, but herbs and spices and things would be absolutely fine.
Cool, that's really useful. She's asked, also, can you advise if preparing baby food with beef dripping is okay? And is it okay to add some bacon to the diet? It's very traditional in this area.
Bacon?
Yes.
Beef dripping. I can't see any reason why beef dripping, it's only going to be in small quantities. So if you're using it to prepare a food that you're then pureeing down to offer to a child, again, if that's going to be a more traditional type of diet that you're aiming to establish them onto, I can't see that being a problem as long as it's not in large quantities. In terms of bacon, my main concern with the bacon would be, again, because it can be quite salty.
Yeah.
So I would just be careful with the amount of bacon that was being added to foods, just because of the salt content again, and just making sure that the baby wasn't getting too much salt. So I'd be more careful with the salt, the bacon.
We've got 2 more questions, and these are a lot more general, so these will be quite good. Would it be appropriate to put in place some portion control for a 16-month-old baby? He eats his meal, yet whenever he sees someone to eat, he asks for more. He's currently 13 kilos, but doesn't say how tall he is.
So, I mean, 16 months old, I would be looking at how much they are having at meal times, and probably looking to sort of serve one portion of a main type course and probably one portion with maybe a fruit as a dessert. But you do tend to find that sometimes toddlers and babies at that stage, when they see people having food, they'll be saying, more, or they want some, and I don't always think sometimes that's not always hunger led. Sometimes it's just because they see other people eating and they know that they enjoy eating, or they enjoy the food that somebody else is eating. So I would definitely be, if you think that they've eaten enough at their meal times and they've maybe had a couple of suitable snacks in between meals. So we'd usually say for a child about that month, so at that age, 3 meals and a couple of snacks a day. And if they've had that and they've eaten that and they've had most of that, then I would say definitely try not to get into the way of always then feeding them when they say they want more, because that's not always going to be hunger led. It might be just because they see some food and they decide that they want it. So I would say there's definitely worth putting, you do need to say no to them at some point. They're not old enough at that age to be able to understand always why they're asking for food and the rationale behind asking for food.
Cool. I think that's quite good, because for me, not knowing anything about it, I know that essentially you feed a baby when it asks, and I wouldn't know the point at which you're supposed to stop that, because again, they at a 16-month-old, in my head, that's still a baby. But of course, that is the point, I suppose, when issues with weight centiles and stuff can start to creep in if you just feed them because they've found out that food's quite nice. Yeah,
and they see people eating and they think, actually, I quite enjoy that, and I want some more, because they don't understand always feeling full or why they're asking for food. So I think it's just being, confident that that they've eaten their 3 meals, that they've had 2 snacks, and if that's happened and they've eaten enough, then that should be plenty.
Awesome.
16 months old, they're a little bit older than a baby. They are starting to head more towards those toddler years, and so definitely.
Awesome. So I've got one more question. We'll just ignore mine because this has gone on way too long. But Rad asked a very long question that essentially amounts to something that I think would be quite good to end the chat on. And that would be, obviously at the minute with Thrive Tribe, you're working into schools and you're helping to help staff, children, parents to engage in a healthier lifestyle. As a parent, you can have as much influence on your child as you can, and you can probably also influence them to agree in school. But if you're a parent or an individual who's wanting to change this whole thing in some way, how can just a person do anything? Like what can just any person do to help in the situation that schools find themselves in? Because obviously, as a dietitian, you're able to get funding, you're able to go into schools with your dietitianness and say, I can help you change, I can help improve the situation. As someone who doesn't quite have those credentials, is there anything they can do?
Definitely. I mean, I would say schools are so limited in terms of their budgets, that they're crying out, desperate for people to either offer to go in and help with all sorts of different things, if that's the type of thing that you would, you know, like to do. So, but equally, if you look at your local, so services like Thrive Tribe, for example, we run programs within lots of different areas within the UK, and there's lots of similar organisations across the UK doing similar things, but we are desperate for people to help us spread the word. So, for example, we'll have a health champion scheme where people can volunteer, come along, receive training from us, but then we look for those people to then take those messages out into their local communities to help us spread the word, because again, we're limited in terms of the numbers of staff we have and number of people we can work with. So by having, and we do that in a more formal way, but I think definitely if you're involved in local communities or in whatever way that may be, so if you're involved in a local church group or community group or toddler group, you know, if you're a mum and you're involved in a preschool group, taking the learning and knowledge and messages you have and thinking about ways that you can spread those messages, I think is really important. The more people we can have giving the same messages and the same healthy lifestyle type messages within lots of different communities, you know, the better. And I think actually that is one of the only ways that we're going to get a change within things, is if we've got lots of people saying the same messages, spreading those messages, making really small changes. So at your local toddler group, if they always serve biscuits with a cup of tea, saying, why don't we try something healthier as a snack, or you know, it can be really, really small changes. But if there's lots of people giving the same message and doing the same thing, I think that can be really helpful. So you can go down, you know, there are formal sort of volunteering, getting involved type routes that you can look for in your local community. But equally, I think if we all do our little part, and you don't have to be preachy about it, and you don't have to, you know, so that they're thinking, oh, here she comes again with her healthy eating messages and fruit. You know, you can do it in quite a subtle way, but I think we can all make a difference if we're all sort of moving together.
Awesome. So to close off the podcast, if you are wanting to sort of work on the nutrition of yourself, of your family, or anything like that, of course I'm biased, but I would hugely recommend, and I would please ask that you do check out the BTN Academy, whether that is on Facebook, Instagram, or if you head to our website, btn.academy, and check out one of our courses. That would be amazing. Heather and myself will educate you for a whole year. But the idea is that our course is practically driven as well as being heavily evidence-based. And so we don't just talk about the theory, we talk about the stuff that you can go out and do. And I think that that's the way that any course should be. If you're already a BTN Academy graduate and you would like to potentially get involved with, as Heather mentioned there, you can go to Thrive Tribe and you can get this training. Heather, how would people access that kind of thing?
Yeah, so although we, this is where it gets a bit confused, though with Thrive Tribe, we actually run services in a number of different areas, so like down in East Sussex and across some of the London boroughs, but our services there have different names, so we're actually working under the One You branding there. But what I'd recommend people do is just look up either their local weight management or healthy lifestyle provider. Most councils will have a company working as their local healthy lifestyle provider. So just have a Google and find out who it is who's working within your area locally. And what you'll find is that there is a little bit of a shift now, much more towards having a much more whole systems approach. So most local organisations will be looking for people within their communities to get involved. So yeah. That's what I'd
Awesome. So I guess you could find that if you didn't, I'm sure you could get in touch with your council in some way and you could have a word in.
Yeah, I'm sure if you Google it, it would be quite easily findable.
Perfect. Well, I think we will end on that. So again, Heather, thank you so much for this. This has been brilliant.
Welcome.
We took a bit more of your time than I thought we would, so I apologise for that. But yeah, it's been a cracking conversation. There's been lots of really useful and interesting stuff from this. So if people would like to find out a little bit more about Thrive Tribe, if they're in the local area, or if they'd like to, I think online you've got some resources and stuff.
Yeah, there's on the Thrive Tribe Academy site, there's resources that people can download. And then, on our Thrive Tribe site, it'll take you to all our local sites as well.
Perfect. So go and check that out if you're interested in that. Otherwise, you can get in touch with me either by contacting BTN Academy Nutrition Education on Facebook or having a look at the BTN Academy on Instagram. I am responsible for both of them, so please do get in touch with me that way. Other than that, thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And you all can head off and do your own thing. Enjoy your evening, and I'm sure I will speak to some of you soon. So thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody.